Reactive Training Systems.
What is up? It's Jim Ellie with Reactive Training Systems. And today I want to go over as many questions as I can answer. If you're not following me, but you are following the Reactive Training Systems Instagram, we have a weekly Q&A where we try to get as many of your questions answered and help you become better athletes and coaches. Ani Power had a question that asked, if you have a development block that goes well, meaning that the squat, bench, and deadlift estimated 1 rep maxes improved, should you repeat that block entirely? And the answer is yes and no. It really depends. The first answer to that is yes, you can repeat very similar aspects of the block if you want to maximize the likelihood that the next block will also go well. However, what is important about your training philosophy and your training decisions is what is right in front of you, meaning are there any meets that are coming up? Are there any travel plans that you have going on? Is there any disruptions in your training that you need to be aware about? If there are no disruptions and there are no competitions, I would actually advise to run an exploration block. The reason is that we want to have a handful or 2 handfuls of training blocks that we can rely on, or training strategies that we can rely on to produce a positive response for you or your lifters. This allows us to become much more confident in our abilities when we can look at a bunch of different training blocks and see a bunch of positive responses. Then we can kind of pick and choose the best parts of each block and put together a greatest hits training block to peak us for a really important competition, for a mock meet, or for something that really matters to you. And that's the thing about emerging strategies. On one hand, yes, follow the athlete response. Do what is needed to improve their performance. And sometimes you don't have enough time to try a bunch of different strategies out. So if you do have a competition coming up, then I do recommend running a block that's very similar. I actually did this with one of my lifters, Ben Wharton, for the European Championships, where he and I talked for a while about different strategies, different tapering approaches. One of the things that we found out in the last year is that every time we touch super high intensities, he tends to fizzle out. However, every time we touched high rep work, things just tended to fly. His estimated 1 rep maxes improved every single week. He was getting really strong, really confident, and we didn't even need to train singles for him to perform well. So we found this out a while ago. However, we were still unsure on how to taper and how to actualize that on game day for high intensity singles. So we found a development block that worked well, and then we had to find a tapering approach that worked well for him. That took 1 mock meet and the British Championships to really trust a peaking approach that we wanted to follow for Europeans. We found the development block that worked, then the taper block that worked. We put them together and ran very similar styles of training. The thing is, it is important that you change the program noticeably in some way. So in this case, instead of changing the rep ranges, what we did is find a few different exercises that we could swap around and move the rep ranges slightly, but keeping the RPE around the same, keeping the stress the same, and that allowed us to produce a positive response for 3 blocks in a row. We ended up actually adding about 45 kilos to his total from September until, December, and had all-time meet PRs. Congrats to Ben, by the way, he killed it. He's an excellent lifter, and he managed to get all of his goals for the competition. Squat Dean, the deadlift queen, asked, why do people do conventional deadlifting? And to be honest, I don't know. I don't know why people do it. No, I know he's just joking. But I think the best thing about deadlifts is that you get to pick however you want to do it and pull the most amount of weight, just like every other lift. So I know he's kidding. But yeah, if you're out there watching this and you want to know why people conventional deadlift, the answer is they did it, it worked well, and they kept doing it until it stops working. Usually people only change things when it doesn't work, and that's kind of the key with emerging strategies, is to be prepared for things not to work, but keep doing the thing that works until you're kind of starting to get bored with it. Phlegmatic asks, would you program singles for Slingshot bench? And yes, I would. I do it all the time. I do it with myself, do it with my lifters. Love slingshot bench. I think it's one of the most underrated exercises, but that's for me, and that's for a few lifters. Some people hate it. They don't like how it changes their position. They don't like what it does for the bench. They don't see a positive response. I do. A few of my lifters do. And I think the key is that when you're selecting the slingshot bench to use, or the slingshot band to use, you select one that doesn't change your technique too much. But I do know that if you can make sure that it doesn't throw your elbows out of position and you're able to maintain a normal feeling, normal grooving bench press, then you'll probably have a better response. Mr. Quadriceratops. Okay, that's definitely his name. Mr. Quadriceratops asks, what to do if you have an uneven bench press and how to fix it. How to fix an uneven or a bench press where there's rotation on the eccentric. You might not need to change anything, but if there is something to change, I'm going to give you a checklist. First thing to check, are your scapula evenly depressed on the bench pad? A lot of times when I work with lifters and when I do seminars, one of their shoulders is elevated, or both of their shoulders are elevated, because they're trying to retract their shoulders too much. The thing is, when you focus too much on retraction, you're generally going to create some sort of a shrug. However, what we really want is to have the shoulders flush. We don't want the shoulders to be elevated. That creates instability. What we want is them to be depressed and stable. Obviously the scapula move, but you don't want them to be elevated, as it's going to just put the other muscles in kind of compromised positions, and it's just not the strongest position for them. So what we want is evenly depressed scapula. Pull your shoulders down. It's like an anti-shrug. Secondly, we want even feet on the bench press, on the floor. If you're a lifter that utilizes leg drive and one foot is here and one foot is here, and you're going to drive through the floor to keep your chest high, then this foot's going to be pressing that way, and this foot's going to be pressing that way. That's going to cause some rotational force throughout the body. So the stability is going to change. So you have to bring them neutral so that you're applying even force, and so that the load of the barbell and the force of the barbell can be distributed evenly across the muscle groups. Now, I want to caveat that by saying there's probably not going to be complete symmetry in any of your lifts, so try not to get super perfectionist about this. But if it's a clear difference like this, which I notice a lot, bring it back to even with your feet. These are your feet, not your hands in this scenario. And lastly, the third one is make sure that your grip is even on the bar. A lot of times people will set up with their ring finger on the ring before they on-rack. And then as they tighten up their hands and then they press out, maybe they have a self-lift off. If you actually look at where their hands are, they've somehow slid their hands from the right or to the left, or maybe somehow inside. But usually something comes and slightly widens. And now, instead of having an even force between the triceps, you have one tricep directly pressing against the elbow, against the wrist, and one pressing against the elbow and creating a moment arm from the elbow to the wrist. So that's just going to create some asymmetry. So you want to even up your hands. If you are lifting alone, I recommend recording yourself and checking this out. I've personally benefited a lot from just having my spotters tell me. I ask, hey, are my feet even? Are my hands even? And then you kind of have to feel out whether or not your shoulders are depressed. So that should help answer that. Stoverate asks, how do you deal with a pinched nerve? I never have experienced a pinched nerve. However, most things in regards to pain seem to come down from load management, which means that we need to manage how much stress we are accumulating each week and compare that to what we're used to. So if one of your weeks your overall training stress is a 10, and then the next week your overall training stress is a 15, then you're gonna have a 150% increase from one week to another. That might lead to a higher risk for injury, higher risk for pain, and your body just can't handle it yet. So sometimes what happens is that inflammation increases, pain sensitivity increases. So what I would do is reduce the load for a while, keep the stress low until you're feeling better. Over time, reducing the training load a little bit and reducing the RPE is a really good way to manage pain. BCAA Steve asks, when is Mark gonna beard up? He used to have a nice beard, but now Mark has mustache. This is a great time to talk about the RTS Classroom. RTS Classroom is an online course. Each course is about 10 lessons that teaches you how to individualize training for your athletes. There is so much information out there about the best training strategies, and the RTS Classroom is not about the best. It's about finding out what is the best for your individual athlete and finding what they need to improve. If you are a coach and you want to learn how to better manage your athletes' programming and training and load management, and you're curious about anything that we talked about already in these questions, we go over things like stress index, optimizing training paradigms, how to design development blocks, how to write pivot blocks, how to optimize a tapering strategy for your lifters, peaking for competition. So if you're interested in that, there's going to be a link in the bio for you to get on the waiting list to sign up for the course. All right, we got 2 more questions. Method Muppet asks, what is the purpose of 600 tempo work? Typically, when we do tempo work, we are trying to improve neurological efficiency, so how the lifter actually perceives the movement. When we're running a 600 tempo block, when a lot of our assistance lifts have 600 tempo, we're trying to control the eccentric. Eccentric training can do a lot of things. It can improve tendon stiffness and make our tendons a bit more durable for future training blocks. So you can do a lot with the 600 tempo, but we tend to do it for high intensities so that lifters can work with high intensities, but the load is going to be limited because it's a 600 tempo. Second, we're going to improve neurological efficiency, meaning that our muscle fibers are going to contract with more efficiency and potentially produce more force in the movements that we care about. It also gives the lifter an opportunity to feel better. They can really feel the movement and groove it out and make sure that it's kind of like the optimal technique for them. Those are just a few reasons to use eccentric training. And lastly, Method Muppet. Method Man. The Method Muppet of gods. He asks me, why am I getting bicep tendonitis and how do we improve it? Well, my son, the answer is that I don't know. I don't know why you have bicep tendonitis. However, if we talk about pinched nerves, same answer. We got to get back to actually tracking our stress throughout a training block. If you don't know how intense you're going, or if every week is different, then it's very difficult to track the stress of training and whether or not the acute to chronic workload is in a range that we're happy with. If you are experiencing pain, you're experiencing tendonitis, reduce the stress. Train with less intensity, maybe less volume, and maybe reduce the amount of exercises that irritate that movement. Find movements that don't bother it and train those. There's so many things you can do if you want to minimize the irritation that you have. An injury is not an easy thing. There's a lot of psychological work you might have to do because if you're thinking about pain all the time, it's harder to get over it. There's some really good articles. If you check out Clinical Athlete, if you check out like Barbell Medicine or Hannah Moves or Pain Science, I think it's painscience.com. There's so much information on how to manage pain, but how we typically handle it at RTS is reduce the stress, get the lifters to actually feel good again, and move with weights that they're happy with. I hope this was valuable. I hope this video is helpful. There might have been some questions you didn't understand or the answers you didn't understand. And if you didn't, please send me a DM on Instagram and I would love to further help you understand any of these questions. Again, reminder, the early bird special of the RTS Classroom is next week. So if you want to get on the waiting list starting Thursday, stay tuned for next week and I will talk to you next time.
Reactive Training Systems.